This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 280, the October 27th, 2017 edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you inside the Brooklyn bunker. Once again, super excited about today's show. Today's show with guest producer, all of you. Thank you very much for chiming in with so many amazing Breeders' Cup questions. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. I also want to answer a non-Breeders' Cup question just as a shout-out to the guy or gal who sent in the question that got the whole ball rolling with this idea of doing these listener appreciation shows. Unfortunately, that was so far back at this point in the mentions that I can't give that person a shout-out, which I would have liked to do. But we'll get to that to kick things off. But first, I want to introduce my co-host. He's here. He's been very busy thinking about your questions, organizing your questions, and, of course, trying to pick a few winners along the way. He's the People's Champion from Planet Texas, Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what do you say?
Planet Texas, Planet Austin, heading to Planet Dallas right after the show. Immediately after, I'm sprinting to the airport. Gonna go. In my previous career as a high school football coach, guy was my mentor. Has a big game tonight against his crosstown rival. So I'm gonna go hang out and check that out.
Little Friday night light action. Will you be seeing your dad as well?
Yeah, I'll catch him. I think I'm going to catch him tomorrow morning for breakfast. But, yeah, I'll go to the game tonight. For people that aren't from Texas or have never been, 12,000 expected for this ball game tonight.
Holy Christmas. Well, tell your dad I said hello, and I hope the right team wins the football. Let's dive right in, JK. Let's start off with that question that got it all started off. It was a question about an Ingrid Mason runner, I believe, who won at Keeneland. It was a horse that was claimed, stepped up in class, and won right back, and hadn't worked in the interim. And the person was just like, I think just honestly asking, like, how does this happen? And, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that go into the ability to claim horses successfully and move them up the ladder. In this instance, I do believe it was a similar, I don't remember if the distance had changed or the surface changed. I don't believe either had. I believe it was a very similar race, just at a higher level. But I mean, from what I understand, there's all kinds of things you can do, and we're talking within. Maybe the person was even asking this with the veil of, oh, is there something untoward going on here? And the fact of the matter is, horses. Well, I'm not going to say that doesn't happen sometimes. There's a lot of things that are there to be seen for a horseman, horsewoman, person who works in racing that could easily move a horse up. It certainly doesn't necessarily have to be improvement that comes from repeated working or that would take a ton of time. It could be a different bit. It could be different shoes. It could be just some sort of different manner of handling or a different atmosphere that could turn a horse around rather quickly. What are your thoughts on this? Is this something that you look at in your handicapping at all? JK, you having a mute problem there?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm muted. I was talking like okay. Yeah. So, it's definitely something that you can get more comfortable with. I think one of the biggest things you can do is if they're claimed off an active trainer, you can hope that trainer has one in on the day that you're looking at Formulator. You can go to that trainer's stats and see like what kind of trainer he is. So I think this horse was claimed off of John Hancock. So you can look at John Hancock with 10,000 claimers. What's his percentage? What kind of percentage does he hit at? And then you can kind of get an idea if maybe that's his weakest area. So you can expect that a horse like a trainer like Ingrid Mason could move up off of John Hancock. But no, I think that there's a lot of different reasons. I agree with you, Pete, when you said that it could be a different bit, different shoes, a different workout regimen, a different feeding schedule, or actual the substance that you're feeding them. It could be they could have an intestinal issue and they have some supplement that they're giving them that solves that problem.
Yeah, this horse was back quick, I believe. So that was part of what they were saying. It's like, what could you do? What could you instantly do to change it? And that's why I thought of those equipment issues. But, there's a lot of different things it could be. It's a good question to ask like a proper horseman as well. Maybe that's something we can pick back up on in a future show.
Sometimes it's not what the claimed trainer's doing, Ingrid Mason's doing, but what John Hancock wasn't doing. That can make the difference, and it's sometimes it's hard to tell what that might be.
And you're just saying theoretically, you're not meaning to impute. Somebody can take that as you're knocking Hancock.
No, not Hancock at all. I think Hancock's he's a good trainer. He's a guy you want to make sure you pay attention to at Keeneland. And the other thing before we go is that I don't know what the running style was different. If you look, they ran the horse for 20 at Keeneland, and the horse was forwardly placed. And then there's been two kind of sporadic where the horse was really coming from really far out of it. So maybe it was just understanding how the horse wanted to be ridden.
How did the horse do in the race that the horse won? Was it reverting to front running tactics?
I don't see the chart that shows the winning race.
That's worth taking a look at because I didn't even think about that, but absolutely, just tactics in the race could make all the difference. So that's another good point as well. I don't want to linger. We could spend.
I'll know in 2 seconds.
Yeah, okay, take a look before we move on. But it's an interesting thing to take a look at, and obviously the point about trainers. And what their particular strengths and weaknesses are, understanding not just what the new trainer is good and maybe not so good at, but also those same things about the older trainer. Was
nearly wire to wire.
Yeah. So, in that case, it might be as simple as, we're going to take this horse back and put the horse on the lead. And, very often good things happen when you do that. All right, let's move on. We got a question from Brian Johnson that I missed last time. What one race other than the turf sprint do you expect to be chaotic with a price horse winning?
So I don't think the turf sprint is going to be chaotic. I think that it could be one of the most formful races with Lady Aurelia. So I don't think that one's going to be chaotic. I think that the probably most chaotic race, in my opinion, is going to be the filly and mare sprint. If Unique Bella does not win, I think that any of the other ones can.
I think that's a fair point. We'll be talking about that race. We got tons of Breeders' Cup coverage coming up next week. It's dizzying. DRF.com, a one-stop shop, really, for all your Breeders' Cup news and information. And then next week, just to give you an idea of what we got going on, we have our European special. In fact, we won't spend as much time on any European-type questions today, I don't think, because we're going to have so much time to talk about them next week. On Tuesday, we've got Ron Wood of Racing Post, not Rolling Stones, but Ron Wood and Nick Luck going to be joining us to talk Euros. JK and I will be co-hosting, peppering them with questions, trying to glean as much insight as possible from those gentlemen. We'll be doing on Wednesday evening, East Coast time, the live co-production of the Matt Bernier Show DRF Players podcast with our friend Matt Bernier. That'll be supersized and a lot of fun. And then we've got a bunch of handicapping sessions, too, through the Citrix software that you can sign up for in the marquees on DRF.com. On Tuesday night, I'm very happy to reconvene the panel of me, Andy Beyer, Andy Serling, to take a quick look at all 13 races. Then later in the week on Thursday, I've got Mike Watchmaker and Brad Free to talk about the Friday last 6 races. And then on Friday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, Jonathan Kinchin himself, the People's Champ, and soon-to-be best-selling author Mike Maloney will be joining to go over the late Pick 6 on Saturday. Tons of great coverage coming up, but I digress. Let's get back to some questions. Here's one from Red Masvello. How many entries in the Classic have both class and stamina to go the 10 furlongs? I think it's about 50% of the field. What do you think, Jonathan Kinchin?
I did a little homework on this question. So it's kind of a lot. It's tricky to me because 6 of the runners have won grade 1s going a mile and a quarter. One of the runners won a grade 3 going a mile and a quarter. And another runner won a grade 1 going a mile and 3/16, which for all intents and purposes is a mile and a quarter. I mean, I don't really see a horse in here that's like, that horse has no shot getting a mile and a quarter. Now, if we didn't have the dirt mile, there would be a lot more horses that we could say that about. would make the race a little bit more interesting. I'm not asking to get rid of the dirt mile. I'm just saying.
I am. Sorry. Just Twitter conversation blending into the podcast. I do not want to spend time on that not particularly interesting question right now. Be more fun with Matt Bernier on Wednesday. And I don't literally mean get rid of it. I just, I don't like the race. And the more people try to convince me I should like the race, the less I like the race. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, no, that's arrogant, collected, Cupid, diversified, Keen Ice, West Coast. They've all wanted a mile and a quarter. So it feels like they're all capable of getting it. It's who's capable of getting it well enough to beat arrogant or Gunrunner.
Yeah, that's really the tricky part. I lied. I will say one more thing about the dirt mile thing. I'm not an idiot. I do understand why the race exists. Obviously, it's terrific for breeders. It's just when I talk about why I don't like it, I'm talking about it really strictly from being a fan / podcast host perspective.
Now, I do know that you would like it. You would like it a lot more if it was always run at one turn like Belmont and Churchill Downs.
100%. That's a distinct discipline where there are real grade 1 races throughout the year. Name me another grade 1 2-turn mile on dirt throughout the year. Is there one? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
But it's kind of like this made up thing. It's not, and Matt Bernier made an interesting point that we'll discuss with him on Wednesday about, well, how is it different than turf? And to me, the concept is that like on turf, those races, there's much bigger difference to me. And they're things. A turf mile is a thing, and a turf miler is a thing. And obviously going longer, I almost feel like on turf you could have, it would be like having the equivalent of the dirt mile on turf would be having like a 10 furlong race in addition to the 12 furlong and the mile. Because those are the different things. Right.
But the thing is your earlier point about the fact that I can't think of, and maybe someone else can think of a 2-turn grade 1 mile dirt race in America.
It's not a thing.
I can think of about 40 grade 1 turf miles in the world. So that it's apples and oranges, like you said. It's not comparing the same thing.
All right, I apologize for that. I had to humor me. All right, Darren Sipes had a question about Lady Eli. Can she win with a 60-plus day layoff? Only one horse has done so in the last 9 editions of the Filly and Mare Turf. That was Dank in 2013. What do you think?
I think that I've seen Darren's name a few times. Darren is very stat driven, and it leads to a lot of good things. I think it's very important. I don't know the answer to this question, but here's what I will tell you: is that I think when you're looking at things like this, you have to look at why that situation is. So if he wants to know, can she win off a 60-day layoff because no one's done it in the last 9 editions? Well, how many horses have tried it?
Right.
And what was their circumstance?
Right. Because
it could just be one of those things where I just don't think a lot of horses probably try to win that race off of a 60-day layoff.
That's great.
And if you're, you know what I mean? And so it's like, and if it wasn't the plan, it was the plan with Lady Eli. Like he was going to run her. He was going to take that 60-day break. It's Chad Brown. So I wouldn't let that historical stat tell the story about this horse. Unless there's been like 17 horses that have tried it and they've all been off the board, then now we're on to something. But I think that the build up of the construction of the question is important.
That's a good point. Stats, I think they're really interesting. Sometimes I think some of them make us roll our eyes, JK, especially when folks are drilling down to such small sample sizes. And I'm not criticizing. I think it's valuable to have people who look at the world in a different way. That's what expands your mind ultimately, examining these questions and either changing your mind or sort of becoming more convinced that the way that you look at the world is right. But I think it's very safe to say that you and I, and we've talked about this before on the show, it's funny because I love stats and I love numbers, but stats don't win races. Horses win races. And for me, I'm a lot more interested in spending time looking at for example, something like internal pace matchups within this race of this group of horses that we know are running in this race, than pulling back and looking at the macro. I know there are people who have success doing that, and I'm not knocking them. It's just not the way my brain works, and I will confidently argue against them when they're dealing with small sample size. I mean, the way Darren asked this question is great, but you might hear somebody say, "Oh, rushing fall in the juvenile turf. Jessamine winners are 0 for 7, in the juvenile Fillies turf. All the winners come from the Miss Grillo and the Talma. Therefore, rushing fall is going to be an underlay." I think that's nonsense.
Right, and I think it's just like it goes down to the basic idea of this question is like, if Lady Eli does not win the filly and mare turf, in my opinion, it has zero to do with 60-day layoff.
Right, that's a good point. Also,
it's a trip. It's a trip. She got a bad trip, or she wasn't good enough. It's going to be really hard to nail it down that the layoff was the reason that she got beat. So I try to not take stats like that into too much into consideration. They just kind of cloud my brain, at least.
Yeah, again, so if it works for you, go for it. But a lot of times for me, it's more noise than signal. And just to take a second deeper look at that question, when you look at the Jessamine, or should I say Jessamine, winners in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Juvenile Turf, look at this. You've got such a good memory. You'll probably remember some of these trips, but there's some doozies in here. So at first glance, there's 6 horses since it became a graded stake, and none were better than 6th. So that sounds like there might be something to it. But then you remember La Coronel's trip last year, Harmonized being too close in the weird ride 2 years back, Reina de Bateria being in a different zip code early in the race. All right, Kitten Caboodle, she was just probably overmatched. Moonwalk probably wasn't good enough. Somali Lemonade was another crazy rank, bad, wide trip. So it's like, when you look at it individually, it's so small, you have those excuses built in. What does it really mean? To me, it doesn't mean much.
And I think 4 of those went on to win grade 1s again, right? I mean, so it's like, It's not like the Jessamine is not like a doomsday race where if you run in that poor race, then you're not very good. It's like you said, it's circumstantial, I think.
All right, let's keep going here. Dan Helder, which equine athletes do you think can confidently be thrown out in multi-race wagers? Which turf race should I not use the all button? 2 kind of different questions. Obviously, the first one is kind of wide open. Answer it however you like.
Okay, so throwing out a horse. You can throw out you want to give you a 20-1 shot to throw out. No one really cares about that.
No,
I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to go out on a limb and throw out a horse that's going to probably be a first or second choice, and I'm going to throw out More Spirit.
Bold move.
That's going to be kind of and that's
the
what
wig
I
is
think.
Twitching in the closet as you say that.
Yeah, it's actually in my carry-on right here. So they're not going to let me through TSA with it. But that's my bold one. I don't like the fact that he's been gone so long. I think that 2-turn dirt mile is a very testing, stamina-driven race because there's so much quality for that distance in that spot. They're going to run a little bit, and he's going to be one that I think is going to take money that I'm going to fade. And the turf question, I think Pete probably knows where I'm going to go with this. I recommend you don't hit the all button in any of them. There's 2 or 3 or 4 horses that you can eliminate. And put on your big boy handicapping pants, save yourself some money, and get rid of 3 or 4 of those horses.
It'll certainly enable you to bet more efficiently and drill down to more of an opinion. I mean, I don't mind at the Breeders' Cup level. I don't mind using some situations where you're tying to your strongest opinions in a sequence, having sort of all as a backup C maybe in certain instances, but I think JK's probably right. There's going to be 2 or 3 horses in every race that you should be able to X out confidently, and you'd be surprised at how much money that saves you and how much more that allows you to have on the combinations you want. A little bit comes down to wagering personality. Maybe for some people they really want to embrace the chaos to that level. I get it. Making chaos work for you. One of the things that Mike Maloney talks about extensively in the new book that we have that will be on sale on November 3rd, Betting with an Edge. But I think there's a way to have chaos work for you where you're still doing it within the context of having an opinion somewhere. And if you're going to hit the all button, that's the way that I recommend you do it. Didn't we do this one last time, this Joseph Sullivan question about horse for course and arrogant? I think we did, JK.
Well, we've covered it. I mean, I can answer it really quick. I think arrogant, I believe that there is a real thing in horse for course. I am of the belief that arrogant, that wasn't why he didn't run well there. However, I love the fact that Bolt Doro ran huge there. I love the fact that Moonshine Memories ran huge there. So I think there's something to it. I just think there's more to the arrogant story than just the track.
I don't know how I'm going to ask you this next question that came in from Horse Sense. It had to do with playing a pick 4 with an A in each leg. What's the best way to construct it? I don't think I want to read these ticket combinations that were put in here. But do you have just a general thought on that? Constructing a pick 4 with an A in each leg?
No, I think, well, maybe I'm wrong, but I think I know what he was doing here, and okay. I kind of love it.
If you can explain it, explain it.
I got excited when I saw it. Okay, so I was actually thinking about this the other day. So yes, a lot of times we use Ticketmaker, and we do, 3 A horses, 2 A horses, 3 B horses, so on and so forth. I was tossing around the idea in my head about having 4 Ticketmaker windows open. An ice cold A-ing a horse in every leg. Your favorite horse in all of those legs.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
I've done stuff like that, yeah.
So you're essentially saying that I am going to be right about one of these cold A's. And that's you're getting your equity there. And I think that was the question he was asking. So for instance, let's just pretend we're doing a double for the sake of the conversation, because it'll be a lot easier to illustrate.
Folks can extend it out logically.
Let's look at like the Turf and the Classic. If you love Gunrunner, then you're going to use all your logical horses with Gunrunner. And then if you love Highland Reel, you're going to use Highland Reel with Keen Ice, Gunrunner, Arrogant, and West Coast. So you're saying that you got to be right once. One of your A's has to hit. If it's like a secondary A and a secondary A, you're going to miss it. But you want it to be one of your solid A selections wins. And I think that's what he's asking, and I've actually toyed around with that idea, and I think that there's something to it.
Perhaps something for you to play around with in the Breeders' Cup contest that you'll be in, which has doubles in it this year, JK. That's got to be nice for a multi-race player such as yourself, especially with pools as big as the ones on Breeders' Cup Day.
Looking forward to it. I'm very excited about that news.
All right. Bill Petty, a regular question person, regular listener, wants to know about this is a good one to talk about on Tuesday, but I gave my 2 cents on Twitter, so we'll get yours. He was sort of curious if the underperforming of European, specifically Aidan O'Brien horses in 2017 gives you any pause about Euros as a class at the Breeders' Cup, JK.
No, I mean, I think that like the difference between a top-notch horse and a great horse and a good horse, top-notch and good, great and good, is that the great ones consistently show up and throw that A performance. The good ones throw A's and B pluses and B minuses and A's and B pluses and B minuses. And so a horse like Highland Reel, a horse like Ribchester, a horse like who else is coming? I'm trying to think of. That's enough for an example, right? Those horses are great. They show their A performance almost all the time. Horses like Deauville and Idaho, I think, were the examples he used. Those horses they're good horses, right, but they're not great because they're not consistent. And so when they show up here, it's no indication of what's going on. What's going on with them or what's going on with European horses in general. Because the truth of the matter is if Idaho and Deauville were great, they wouldn't come over here in the summer.
Right. That's
they don't send great ones here in the summer. They send their ones that are kind of good, below average, could maybe pick up a little check over here, maybe need firm ground, maybe need Lasix. The ones that can run off Lasix, the ones that show up every time, they're running at Ascot. They're running at Goodwood. They're running at all the grade 1 events that are there, and I think that's why it's not really comparable.
Yeah, I mean, there are exceptions, Highland Reel being the one that comes to mind, but, for him, he's always been a horse that's been about hearing his hooves rattle in that firm ground, and I think, as he's gotten better, he's done more over there and less over here. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a logical fallacy in saying, okay, these second-tier kind of subpar, I mean, I don't mean to be too mean, you're right, they're good horses, but they're very far down in the firmament from the ones that you mentioned, JK. So I don't see why. I don't think their performance has anything to do with what we're going to see from other Europeans. If you want to question the O'Brien thing a little bit, look, I'm not going to make that mistake, but I can see how someone would want to say, hey, he hasn't had success here lately. Maybe something is going on with his process for shipping. I mean, O'Brien for years was a bet against here. And then he hit this string where he became unstoppable here. And now it kind of looks like it used to look before that. So it's hard to know if it's just complete randomness, what the situation is. Once again, my default position is to worry less about that stuff and more about what I see on the page in the race itself. Let's move on, Jonathan. How did Jockeys sway your picks? DL is the name of this person. Mentions that he always upgrades Kent de Sormo at Del Mar on the turf. He seems to know how to win on it better than anyone else. Do you use that type of factor in your handicapping, and will it apply at all at the Breeders' Cup?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with him about Kent, by the way. Kent, he moves at the right time, and I think that's important there because I feel like there's a certain time you want to move, and it happens to be going into the final turn. He always gets his horses into position there, and so I agree with Kent. Yeah, I mean, I look, when you're looking at the Breeders' Cup Sprint, for instance, I mean, I don't think that really matters. I mean, unless you just get some no-name guy who just happens to be on a great horse, that can be kind of tricky. But, Joel Rosario, Javier Castellano, Johnny, Irad, Jose, they're going to be fine. If their horses are good enough, they're going to be able to win at Del Mar, going 6, going 7. There's some trickier situations, maybe going a mile. I think the longer you're going in a race, the more important that a jockey's experience with that track is, because knowing when to move, knowing when the right time and the wrong time is. But it's definitely something to consider. But on the biggest days, it's not something I look too deeply into.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about the biggest days. It is interesting, though. You do see some doozies. I mean, I'll never forget, wasn't it as great a jockey as Ryan Moore and that head-scratcher of a ride on Seventh Heaven last year. But I got to figure that, on balance, the crowd does a great job of sort of factoring the rider into the price. It does differ for me at a meet that I'm following consistently. I think the Del Mar Kent example is great. You're just watching a meet and you're following every day, and you'll just sometimes see a jockey so in tune with the paces of the races and any biases that might be on the track that jockey really can be worth, at least a length. And in those situations, I might always say, okay, this jockey's been riding so well, getting these, big long shots to run fourth. The horses were supposed to win. I'm going to spend a little extra money and include this horse because this jockey's riding him. Or when I evaluate this horse, I'm going to say he's going to run 3 points faster on the buyer scale because this jockey's on. I'll do that like when I'm following Saratoga. At the Breeders' Cup, I feel like it's priced in and it's a dangerous game, but it's not one that I would say you can't play. Okay, Dave Herman wants to know about how he should allocate his $1,000 budget. Gosh, we must have answered a very similar question to this because it sounds so familiar, but I don't think it was this one. He generally likes pick fours, was planning on setting aside 350 of that 1K for the pick four. Should I play more than one pick four for 350?
I mean, it's a tricky question. It's a little bit, it's kind of confusing. Look, if you have $1,000 and you want to play the late pick four on Saturday and the late pick four on Friday, then whichever one you like the most, bet more on it. I mean, I don't feel like your appetite is going to be is going to be satisfied by just betting 2 pick fours on the weekend. So I might take the one you like the most, bet it for 350 or 400 or whatever, and then maybe split up the other 600, 650 on 2 other pick fours or pick threes throughout the weekend. You're going to be really antsy that early pick four when the Breeders' Cup races start, and you're waiting around for the late pick four. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in have 3 bets on the day and just go with it, and bet your 3 things. I think betting every race is wrong. In fact, I had a guy reach out to me, a young guy reach out to me on Twitter, and we actually talked on the phone the other day, and he wanted to talk about kind of being in a slump and whatever. And it turns out he's betting every single race.
Yeah,
you just can't do that.
Very
and
hard.
Because when you're right, you didn't make enough money because you wasted money on your action bets. Pick 3 or 4 spots and attack those spots. And if you're right, it's going to pay for the times you were wrong. You can't spread yourself that thin. And so that would be my advice here is if you feel like you need to play every pick 4, then play every pick 4, but make sure you're playing the one you like the most for more money. Allocate it. You should never be betting the same amount no matter what. Your opinion should dictate how much you're wagering.
That was the point I was going to make. Let your opinion be your guide and have a game plan once you have PPs and can ascertain where that opinion is strongest. For novice players, they might want to play every race. They're cutting their teeth. I get it. Try to, especially if you're keeping records, do this. Try to keep as big a difference as your budget will allow between the action bet. I don't care if you're betting 2 win place for your action bet, if you have to bet that low, so you're betting 10 or 20 times more on something where you really have an opinion. Action bets into the current takeout environment, and I fall guilty of this as much as anybody. They can crush your equity, and they turn winning meets into losing meets, and you've got to be disciplined if you're going to go that route. And if you can be even more disciplined and avoid the action plays, play in a contest, play in a low money contest on DRF tournaments for the day. Then you have your little route in every race. It's keeping you engaged, so you pay more attention to what's going on at your track and save that other betting capital for the better opinions. Our friend Michael Baychok asked a question. Is he making fun of us, or is this a real question? We're about to find out. Who is the Euro most likely to win and most likely to be a bet against favorite? That's a cool question. What do you think, Jonathan?
I think Highland Reel is the most likely Euro to win.
More than Lady Aurelia.
Is she a Euro?
I'm counting her as a Euro. I mean, she does all her racing over there.
All right. Well, her owners, her trainers, and she's raced here. That's why her.
You can make the case, but
I get it. I'm with you. The most and then the best bet against. The best bet against is Lady Aurelia. I just think she's going to win, but I think the most value, and if you're looking for someone to bet against, would be her because she's going to be a heavy favorite. So I think that and it's a chaotic race where if she misses the break, then it could all be over. So I think there's the least room for error. However, I don't think she's going to miss the break, and I think she's going to wire him and win. But that would be the one that I would look to bet against if I was looking. I think I'll probably be singling.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that bet against question yet. I just haven't dug enough into all the form at this stage of the game to answer that with any confidence. The big Europeans who it appears like will be here, I've seen some negativity about Ribchester. I don't know why. He looks to me perfectly suited for American racing, and I wouldn't be looking to stand in front of him. The Aidan O'Brien juveniles I talked about, he's had no success in that juvenile filly race, but boy, watch that tape on September and tell me she's not super talented. I'm not super happy with the concept of betting against her. So I don't know. I don't have one to bet against yet. Maybe one will come up as the work gets done a little bit more. And that's a question maybe we'll talk more about with Nick and Ron on Tuesday. Turf Capper wants to know, what are the minimum odds you will take in a Breeders' Cup race and why? What is your value analysis?
1 to 9 would be the lowest I would take.
At least he's honest, folks.
No, I mean, it depends on what your goal is and your betting strategy and what your betting personality is. My betting personality is to
shorter the better.
Is to have multi-race bets for obnoxious amounts of times. I want to hit a $10 pick 4. I want to have a $25 pick 4. I want to have a $5 pick 4, a $40 pick 3. That's what I'm looking to do. I'm looking to place a larger emphasis on my opinion. So if I can get a 1-9 involved in there while the rest of the world is trying to get cute, then that's fine with me. Now, if you're just betting to win, obviously I wouldn't take a 1-9. I wouldn't take anything lower than 3 or 4 to 1 if you're betting to win, unless you happen to be betting on Bolt Doro.
I was going to say I would definitely
if you're,
take lower than
if you're betting
3 to
on
1
Bolt
on him.
Doro, or if you're taking a stand against one of the big horses in the Classic. If you're taking a stand for, if you're like Arrogate's going to run, take the 5 to 2 or the 2 to 1 or whatever you get on him, and vice versa. If you like Gunrunner, then take the 9 to 5 or the 8 to 5. But in most races, the dirt mile, the sprint, the turf, the mile, I'm looking 4 to 1 ish would be my win cutoff.
Funny enough, I would happily bet to win lower than that. Again, it all comes down to the specific opinion in the race and what I think that horse's chances are. There are Breeders' Cup races where, Bolt Doro being the prime example, I think the horse is at least 50-50 to win. So anything above odds on is great value. I wrote about this today, actually, in a piece inspired by a conversation I had with Steve Bick the other day about the nature of value. And I might as well talk about it for a second here. It's just a horribly misused term. Value doesn't mean the horse is a long shot. Value means the horse's chance of winning is greater than his price on the board suggests. I think I'm going to go so far as to say in fixed odds betting, it's harder in USA with parimutuel and the way odds can change. So I wouldn't recommend backing too many odds-on shots in the USA because great value at 4 to 5, bad value at 3 to 5, and you don't know what you're getting until you do. But let's say we're talking about an environment where you know what price you're getting. I think you're almost just as likely to find value on an even money shot that really has a 60% chance of winning. If you can get even money on that horse, that's tremendous value. It's much harder to find, and you're kind of splitting hairs a little bit too if you're like, well, this horse should be 20 to 1 and he's 25 to 1. In like percentage terms, that's like a sliver of an overlay, if at all, and they're so hard to find. So when you talk about value, it's not tied at all to a longer price. I mean, obviously, it's great when you find the horse that is 20 to 1 that should be 2 to 1, but I'll be honest with you, that never ever happens to me. I will find those 6 horses I make 6 to 1 that end up getting ignored for whatever reason and are 20 to 1. You'll see that. But the whole concept of value for me is not tied into the price on the board, it's tied into the chance of winning. And with that said, anytime I see that phenomenon in a Breeders' Cup market, I'm happy. I don't put a floor on it. If I'm doing the 100% job and I'm pricing up the whole race and I see one of my contenders, one of my horses I like, that's a longer price on the board than I've made the horse, I'm happy to bet it. And it's as likely to happen on the low end of the odds spectrum as it is on the high end of the odds spectrum. All right, here's one from Joe Hernandez. How important is recency for the different races, dirt sprint, turf sprint, dirt routes, and turf routes?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that recency to me is more important in the 2-turn races.
Interesting. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself as you say that.
Well, I'm trying to pick one. I didn't want to be on the fence.
I don't think it matters at all the way that horses are trained today. It's interesting. In the Breeders' Cup, specifically the Breeders' Cup Dirt Sprint, is one of the first big races I remember. In my earlier days as a horse player, the Breeders' Cup, I kind of treated it like, and this was giving it, as great as it is, giving it too much importance. I kind of treated it like a final exam and would do all this extra study. And I'd go back and I would clip some of the PPs, and there also used to be that fun book, I'm not sure if he still does it, by Jim Mazer called Crushing the Cup, where he'd print the PPs of the old Breeders' Cup winners. And it's really fun and instructive, especially as a novice player, to go through and look at those and see what a Breeders' Cup Sprint winner looks like, for example. And one of the first things I noticed where having more time seemed like it was almost an advantage was in the dirt sprint. I feel like before it became everybody winning races and stakes races, 30-plus day layoffs or even 60-day layoffs, that was something that was happening in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Sprint. So I can guarantee you recency doesn't matter and hasn't mattered for quite some time in that race. But again, the Lady Eli thing doesn't bother me. That's a 2-turn turf race. The more Spirit thing, though it bothers you, and I get your hesitation about it, Jonathan, it would not surprise me in the least. I don't think he'll offer value, but it would not surprise me in the least to see that horse win off maybe the longest layoff in Breeders' Cup history. So it's for me, it's just not a factor, like, at all.
Right. Well, wouldn't that be DeHaas? Didn't he? I was young, but didn't he like have a year
He
left?
had one prep, so I think it was.
Okay,
I think it was more that he hadn't raced in a year or whatever it was, and then I thought he did have a prep like within a month. He popped into my mind too. I'll look him up.
Anyways, yeah, no, I don't disagree. I mean, I think it's a tricky question, but I think you're right. The way that horses are trained nowadays, it's probably a rabbit hole that I wouldn't go down when making a decision. I think there'd be other factors that I would look at to come up with a conclusion about a horse being off of a break. I will say this: if it's the plan, it's significantly less worrisome than if it's kind of the secondary thing because there was an issue.
That's a great point. Can you think of a horse for whom that is the case?
I mean, I don't think that. I mean, Lady Eli was the plan. Arrogate was the plan. Gunrunner was the plan, which wasn't that long, but they were going to skip the Jockey Club Gold Cup. It was not the. I mean, I think Dre Fong was the plan, but it was not the plan with the more Spirit. And I mean, I never heard Baffert say after the Met Mile, like, all right, we'll see you guys at the Breeders' Cup. That doesn't feel like that was the plan.
It is interesting. Lady Eli did have a different plan, but the plan changed for a good reason, not a bad reason. Remember, there was some reporting, DRF.com, I think a Dave Grenning piece, after the Diana, the original plan was going to be Flower Bowl, a Breeders' Cup, but then she was apparently doing so well at Saratoga, they called the audible and said, well, we got the Boston Spa right here. And fortunately for us, she ran in the Boston Spa that day. And then from there, it seemed like, okay, well, we'll just train her up. Does that bother you when the plan changes for a more positive type of a reason?
No, not at all. That's a good example of that not being a negative, but there definitely can be some negatives.
I love this question. We could spend the rest of the show on it, but we won't because we have other stuff going on. With so much information available, how do you go about culling everything to what's reliable and what's not? This one's from Matthew Hess, and he has a follow-up, but we'll do it one point at a time.
Well, I think the thing you want to do is follow information of people that have been reliable for you in the past. Don't suddenly read some Breeders' Cup Breeders' Cup betting guide you see on Twitter with two guys writing in it you've never seen or heard of. I would stick to what you've been doing.
You throwing shade on anybody with that?
No, not at all. Okay. No shade. I'm saying I wasn't
sure what you meant, but I was like, sounds like something stuck in Jonathan's craw here today.
No, I follow some random gambling guys and even some guys that work at Vegas sports books. And I've clicked on some of their links and they have Breeders' Cup write-ups. And I'm like, where have you been the rest of the year? You know what I mean? That's what I'm referring to.
Fair.
I think that try to stick to that. And then also take, one of the things that I like to think I'm good at is taking the information and then trying to sort through it. So just keep working on that. Really tell the story and look for people to agree about things. If look for confirmation. If Mike Welsh says Arrogate's working good, then see if you can find someone else talking well about Arrogate working good, and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't try to do anything new during the Breeders' Cup. Just let it all in and let it soak in and try to process it to the best of your ability. But I understand where you're coming from. It is tough.
It's difficult, especially because you get this thing where, stats and workouts are the two areas, I think, where you hear so much more about it in advance of the Breeders' Cup than you do for anything else. I guess my advice would be to try to stick as much, let that stuff inform you, take it in, but don't get too far away from the fundamentals of handicapping. I guess that's really my lesson. I feel like I've said versions of that 3 different times throughout the course of this show. And depending on what level of player you are, maybe you don't. If you're really new, boy, now we've opened this question into a whole. This is where you could spend a lot more time. I mean, for me, DRF Formulator is just a great place to sort of entrench. And what I love about it so much is you can sort of do the blend of the PPs produced by DRF and essentially your own PPs, where you can put your own thoughts, your own subjective view of a race in the form of notes in the embedded within the lines of those PPs. To me, like if you're looking for the simplest way to do it, looking at the DRF stuff and augmenting that with your own information and maybe putting in notes and things that you hear, whether it's workout information or trip notes from somebody you respect, and being able to sort of create your own personal PPs, I think that's a good way to do it. And that segues actually nicely into the second part of this question, which is, a discussion of the Timeform US PPs versus classic PPs. For me, though, I'd say classic PPs, while fine, are almost out of the question only because I'm such a formulator guy. I'd want to talk about how one would use formulator in Timeform US. And for me, and I'm not just saying this shilling for the company, because I was doing this long before DRF had the partnership with Timeform US, but I say use both. I think they're super helpful together. You could, if you want, you could use Timeform, and when Craig codes a pace red or blue, you can put that in your notes in Formulator and sort of use Timeform to just inform your Formulator, or you can just separately look at the two and get a sense of the different numbers. You get a good sense of the scale, the time. Typically, you take 20 off the Timeform number, it's going to come more or less in line with the Bayer scale for very quick and dirty purposes. I don't mean this to be like too literal, but for quick and dirty purposes, that's going to give you an idea. That'll give you some sense of where the two figures are very much in line or the two figures are different. Maybe when the two figures are different, that's something you want to slug into your notes. The comments on the pace from Timeform US, super helpful. I love slugging them in my DRFPP. And then when it comes to the actual handicapping, the pace projector is a great way to save yourself some time. I wouldn't rely on it blindly by any means, but I do like the idea of copying over, if you're a printer like me, copying it over onto your DRFPP and using that to help you wade your way into the race. I don't think you have to choose between Timeform US and DRF Formulator. I think they work great together. JK, how do you compare and contrast the two?
Yeah, no, I need both. I like both. We talked about it before. One of my favorite kind of evolutions in my handicapping is I use the pace projector to guide the order in which I handicap a race. So they say the 1's supposed to be on the lead with the 4 sitting off of it, with the 7 right behind them. Then I look at the race, the 1, the 4, the 7, all the way back to the back. I think it helps you kind of design the race better in your head. So that's one of the things I really love having Timeform for. And then I think that Timeform's pace situation is very helpful to kind of see the coded red and blue to understand if a pace was fast or slow, and then a different perspective on the figure. So and you can also, there's a notes right underneath the breeding, the owner, the breeder. There's a note drop down where you can add a note about a horse and it stays in there forever. So you can have the same kind of notes about like you can on Formulator. So I think you should use both. And I had a guy call me the other day. I've been
getting a lot of calls. You're a popular fella.
I'm doing this mentor thing with the tournament out in Vegas, like helping like new players who want to get involved. And so one of the guys called me and we were just chatting, and I told him that he needed to add Timeform to his not stop what he was doing, but just add Timeform to his workload and to his process. And so like I said, I think it's great. I love it. And I think you should just use both of them. Your mind's used to looking at the classic PPs, so keep doing that, but allow Timeform to supplement that.
You are a big believer, and I hope I'm not going to cause you to be giving away the store here, giving away some of your edge, but I'm going to ask, and you can be evasive if you don't want to answer. I know you're a big fan of those Timeform race ratings, and I think you've told me in the past they give you like kind of a line on the class. Tell us how and why you use those.
Yeah, they're not as helpful in a Breeders' Cup setting.
Okay.
But when you're like at Keeneland and you're at you're looking at like a non-winners of 2 16 claimer, and you have horses that are coming in from Hawthorne, Remington, Gulfstream Park West, and Naira, and also like Turfway Park or whatever, and Churchill. It's an easier way of understanding, what is a 16 claimer at Churchill versus a 16 claimer at Turfway, and it gives you like a numerical number that actually is based on the figures that those horses are running. I think there's more to it. You'd have to look through the like tutorials about exactly how that number is constructed, but I find it to kind of help me understand the class situation a lot better for like the allowance races, starter allowances. A maiden special weight at Keeneland versus a maiden special weight at Ellis Park or whatever. So,
and you'll physically write those numbers in. I think it's more than that. I think it's more than the class level. I think it goes a little deeper and gets into the specifics of the horses running in that race.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not just
it's a compilation. If there's 10 horses in the race, they look at those 10 horses and they give the race a number.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a really interesting thing that I probably don't use enough. But we talk all the time on the show about wagering personality. There's also such a thing as handicapping personality. For some people, less is going to be more. There might be some people out there, probably more, not serious cash bettors, but contest players for whom they do their best. They go through, they look at one set of PPs, and that's what they rock and roll with. You and I are suggesting sort of a blended approach of the formulator plus Timeform US, the big things from DRF. But there's, of course, lots of other PP products out there. And if you're the type of person who can take in a lot of information and process it in an elegant way, by all means, feel free to look at the Thorograph sheets. I know some players who will include the Thorograph figures in with their DRF PPs and formulator. If that's not going to make your brain explode, do it. But be very careful, because in a lot of instances, you will get to that point where the brain will not literally explode, but it will start to hurt a little bit. And by looking at too much, you can give yourself a headache. But you sort of need to figure out where you are and what works for you in that regard, and then take it from there. Okay, 3 more questions. I think we can get to these, JK. I think we can do this. We got 8 minutes. Here's a cheeky one. I don't mind a cheeky question every now and again. We're asking for questions. This person apparently has an answer. And technically his question is, who is Aidan O'Brien's most likely winner at the BC? Hint, it's not Highland Reel. You clearly disagree. Where do you think this person, racetrack fan, is going with this?
Probably one of those Juvenile Fillies, I would guess. Or maybe U.S. Navy flag. It's probably a juvenile. U.S. Navy flag or September and Happily, right?
Well,
those are all.
There's a lot of problems with that right away, because first of all, Happy's probably running in France on Sunday.
Okay.
Maybe he means September, and September, I mean, she's awesome. That tape from the last day, talk about a trouble trip. It's interesting. Rob Dove, one of the top 10 pro punters in the UK today, disagrees with me, thinks the trouble is overblown. I was super duper impressed with her, but I don't think I can call her a more likely winner than Highland Reel. Now, the thing with U.S. Navy flag and Mendelssohn is it's unsure which race they're going to run in, unless they've announced something since I've been awake this morning and didn't see. It sounds, the vibes I was getting from what Aidan O'Brien was saying about their relative experience was that Mendelssohn, despite the dirt pedigree being kin to Beholder, was going to probably be the one for the turf, and U.S. Navy flag in the juvenile. So if our friend was implying that U.S. Navy flag was the most likely winner, thinking he was going to run in the juvenile turf, I got bad news, and the bad news is called Boldora. So I'm saying if you have to pick just numerically who the most likely winner is, it's Highland Reel, and it's not close.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Paul Graffi, any changes expected to the Del Mar surface? Faster, deeper? Do past performances, I assume he means over the surface, still have merit?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, you have to look at the past performances, but don't be surprised. It's going to happen. There's going to be a horse that jumps up and wins one of these races that is not – you look back at the paper and say, if they ran the race again, I wouldn't be able to have it. So try to avoid those spots, but be prepared for them. They're going to happen at some point.
Yeah, that gets back to that idea of, especially if you're building, let's say, 3 pick 3s on Ticketmaker with 1A and spreading. I don't mind on the most chaotic race with your other two best opinions, the idea of penciling in that all ticket at the Breeders' Cup as much as I would normally. As long as you're tying it to the other strong opinions, that is the way to catch. That is the way to catch those. I wouldn't have had it after the race, because a lot of the time I wouldn't have had it after the racehorses are the ones that lead to pick 3 payouts where you can buy a new car.
Right.
I mean, so do you, as an anti-all guy, do you take my point on that, or do you still think it's too wimpy?
I still think it's too wimpy.
I mean, I kind of think it's too wimpy too. There are some horses it's obviously a joke. We know some people who are like this, though. We know some people, and our friend Pipes comes to mind, who after the race, a horse will win, and he'll say, I couldn't have had that after the race. And I really think he means it. Like, actually, if we could invent time travel at that time and go back 15 minutes, I still think, like, on principle, he wouldn't play that horse. It's just, I think, the way his brain works. He's a stubborn fellow, that Piper. But for me, in reality, I would always change the bet to win. I always say, the old thing Frank Scatoni and I always used to say to each other, would you rather be rich or be right? And we would always say we would always fall on the rich side of that argument. But there are some horses that I will project in the future and be like, okay, if this horse wins, I really don't need to have it. I really dislike this horse so much. So those horses I would X out. But then there's others who it's just like, the race is so chaotic. I can see the scenario where they'd be at least worth throwing in for a minute. We didn't really touch I guess we talked enough about the horse for course stuff, right?
Yeah. And then a couple things real fast, not to hijack you. We got a text from our friend Mike Hogan. Keen Ice has been retired. I Googled it. It's true.
Yeah, no, I saw that yesterday. I meant to say it at the top.
I had no idea.
Yeah, he wrenched an angle. He's off to stud at Calumet, I think.
Oh, good for him. There's a couple of questions I wanted to blast through real fast that we had on another thing.
Oh, no, I thought this was the only one we had.
No, let's just speed around them real fast.
Let's do it. You take the lead.
Timothy Day asked any pick 4 ideas for Friday. Here's my A pick 4 ticket right now if we had to do it. In the first leg, U.S. Navy flag and voting control. The second leg, Cupid, Sharp Azteca, Practical Joke. The third leg, the 2 Chad, Significant Form and Rushing Fall. And then in the filly and mare, the distaff, Abel Tasman, Paradise Woods, and Stellar Wind. That's my if I had to bet it today. Bill Petty asked over under on Chad winners for the weekend at 3.5. I'm gonna take the under. And we'll get to that. We'll try to talk about that a little bit with Matt when we have Matt next week. There's a couple more that were good. Set the over under on how many times Duke Matisse tweets about a bad ride from a jockey. It's 26, and I'll take the over.
There's juice on the over for that.
Especially if they're serving cake bread, then he's more likely to do it in that situation. And the other thing I wanted to tell you guys is that I love a horse tomorrow. I have a trip on. It's the 5th at Belmont. It's a horse named Congruity, where the horse was bet out, first-time turf for Chad. It's a maiden race with Christophe Clement, Shug, Michelle. I mean, every trainer you can think of. Chad has another one in there. This one's 3-1 on the morning line. He rushed up in an unbelievably fast pace that collapsed. And held on, I think, with a little bit more of a heady ride, a little bit more of a Chad restraint there. That horse could really get things done. It's in the 5th, so you could maybe single on the back end of a pick 5, or maybe start a pick 3 going into some of the cool stakes they have tomorrow at Belmont.
Too short to bet on the win end, you think?
I don't know. I think he's 3-1 morning line. I mean, I think he'll probably come down off of that because it's Chad, and he did have a little bit of an excuse last time. But I'm telling you, there's some like heavy hitters in there. I forgot names. I mean, if you think of a trainer that gets bet in New York, he has a first time starter or a horse with pedigree in the race.
I feel like we see that all the time in races where Chad opens up at 4-5, though. So I think
it could happen.
Your idea of trying to get live in the pick 5 or the back end of the pick 3 probably strong there. All right, I think we gave folks the schedule. Tuesday, regular time, 11 a.m. Check out the site. Tuesday night, I got Andy Byron, Andy Serling, going to have fun with that. Wednesday night, Matt Bernier, JK, and me combined podcast Matt Bernier show. Thursday at noon, Friday at noon, going to be having handicapping sessions about Friday and Saturday, respectively. I'm exhausted already just reading my schedule for next week, Jonathan, and I got to, have 5 deadlines too. Oh well.
And you have to have adult beverages with me at some point.
I think we'll definitely find some time to get that done. I can't wait. You know I love this stuff. I'm just joshing. Thanks everybody. Thank you to everybody for listening. You make the show so much fun to do, such inspiring stuff, and we love the questions. Keep them coming. We'll be back on Tuesday. Oh, I should thank you, JK. Got to thank Jonathan Kinchin. He'll be back on Tuesday, too. I'm Peter Thomas Fornital. May you win all your photos.